Hey everyone, welcome to another Real Reflective Practice. I'm your host, Dr. Anjali Pereira, also known as the Disillusioned Medic. Say hello to me here in the comment section if you're watching tonight, and thank you so much for joining me for another one of these. So, quick announcement before we start. I have basically decided to send my daughter back to nursery, which was a bit of a nail-biting, conflicted dilemma and quite a drawn-out conversation between me and my husband. But yeah, we think it's okay for her to start back gradually. Oh, hello, Hannah. And yes, I definitely need to send her back for my sanity for at least one day. So anyway, the reason I'm telling you this is it means that now I have a bit more time in the week to coach. So my current mentees know that I've been cramming all of my coaching into the weekends and the evenings since COVID-19 started over the last few months. But I know that doesn't always work for everybody. So it's good to have some weekday time back for work purposes. So for those of you who got in touch about weekday sessions, that is now possible. So that's very exciting. And yeah, for anyone else who's interested, just drop me a line at dranjalipereira@gmail.com. So let's kick off tonight's show with a reflection sent to me by a teacher called Jenny, who is commenting on the practice on boundaries that I did with my teacher friend Hannah Kadji a couple of weeks back. So Jenny says, "Hi, thank you so much for sharing your personal experiences. I can totally relate to what Hannah says, and it feeds into what you were saying in a previous episode about keeping the doctor's mess, Anjali. In my second teacher training placement, the staff room was down the corridor that you needed a fob for, and the students could not go down. Having those 45 minutes completely pupil-free really helped everyone to reset. By contrast, in the school I taught at during my first year, the Academy Trust had the clever idea of no staff rooms in order to be one community. So you were never away from the children and could never talk in private with the other teachers. We were always on duty, and it wasn't worth the free lunch that we got in return. In other schools that I've done cover work in, there'll be several knocks on the staff room door or phone calls during lunch break, and even sometimes the door remains open when not all the pupils are outside and some are milling around the corridor just outside the staff room. On basic needs to eat, etc., I remember one teacher saying to me about working during lunch breaks, 'If I don't eat, tough, the kids come first.' I doubted how well she would be performing on an empty stomach." Well, Jenny, thank you so much for those comments. It's really interesting to talk about how, I know I said this on the stream with Hannah, but how some of the experiences in the teaching world mirror experiences in the medical world. And it's interesting also that the leadership at that school packaged up your loss of staff rooms as community, quote unquote community, as you said. And it struck me really that that's a form of workplace gaslighting, really, because you know you're getting a raw deal there, right? I mean, you know the real reason that they're doing it is financial, or you know there's some other factor at play, and yet they're trying to make you believe that they're taking away your staff rooms for your benefit, and that it's somehow a positive thing, and even that you should be grateful for that. So yeah, a lot of twisting your reality and bullshitting, frankly. So I'm very glad that you're no longer there, and I completely agree with you as well about the eating thing. I'm a great believer in putting on your metaphorical oxygen mask before you help another person. So personally, I would say I would want my teachers and my doctors and anyone really who had a big impact on my life to be well fed and not faint with hunger when they were making decisions about me. So yes, I completely agree with you, and thanks again for reaching out. And yes, to everyone else, please keep sending me your reflections. I promise to read each and every one of them out live on air. So yeah, email them to me or send them to me on Twitter or Facebook at DisillusionedMed. Pick yourself a pseudonym as well if you want to. You don't have to, but some people like anonymity, and sometimes they come up with some great names. And yeah, thank you in advance for your thoughts. So tonight we are talking about the theme of curiosity. And I know you know that normally I kick off with a story, But I'm changing things up a little bit this week, and I am going to have my guest tonight tell you a story. Dr. Rohit Chitkara is a friend of mine from way back in the day when we were both considering leaving medicine. So he's really one of my community of disillusioned medics. Rohit is now a business consultant working at PwC, and he works in their disruption and innovation teams. And he tells me he does this to fund his restaurant addiction. So I'm really excited to have him on the show tonight, and yeah, to be doing something a little bit out of the ordinary. Rohit, welcome.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good actually. Quite excited at the reopening of restaurants because I've been cold turkey for a few months.
I was going to say, how have you not gone into withdrawal with this restaurant addiction?
I have. But I've been substituting it with actually cooking, which is not the worst substitute. But there's only so many courses I can make for myself. So yeah, looking forward to that. Despite the public health risk, I'll ignore that for a little bit.
That's fair enough. So Rohit, we are talking about the theme of curiosity tonight, and I believe you have a story for us. Oh, Rohit, I think we've lost you. We've lost the connection a little bit.
Hello?
Oh, there you are again. Hiya.
I'm back. Good. Sorry.
Back.
Yeah. Connection's not as great in my home up north.
You're in Liverpool, right?
Yeah, I've gone back to Liverpool to see the family.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for letting me sort of tell a story. I know it's something that you normally do at the beginning of these. So I guess the story that when I think of curiosity, there's something that I've gone back to, and I was a fresher at university, so this was like 13 years ago. It's a long time. I was in a lecture, and obviously there's not many lectures from our fresher year that many of us remember. And I don't even know what the lecture was about, to be honest. But right towards the end, the professor, or whoever was giving us a lecture, he said to us, if there's one publication that you should read as a medical student, it's The Economist. So quickly that got me out of my sort of suspended stupor, and not paying attention. I was like, The Economist, but this is medicine, and I don't do economy. What's like, in my ignorance, I thought economy was a load of numbers. It's not relevant to us. And he basically went on to say about how to really understand medicine, and if you really want to practice medicine, and if you want to understand where medicine is going, you have to understand the fact that medicine's part of a system. It's not just, reading the Oxford Handbook or whatever and learning a load of scientific facts. It operates within a system, and all of the systems in our life operate within a wider system of society. And then within the world, there's many societies. And if you really want to understand what medicine is and where it's going, where it's come from, you need to look beyond that system that's staring you in the face, because all our systems, they're interlinked. They kind of all affect each other in some obvious and not so obvious ways. And I was a bit like, okay, interesting. Didn't really quite understand. I kind of got where he was coming from, but I didn't fully get it at that point as an 18-year-old. But what I didn't realize at the time, and I've realized upon reflection, is how what he had done is he planted this seed of the concept of curiosity. And I remember afterwards, it was a break after this lecture, and I was, with my friends who had been sitting next to in the lecture hall, and somebody brought it up, and everyone was kind of like joking, laughing about it, like, what the hell is he on about? Like, I'm here to learn like Kamara and Clark. I mean, no one probably said that, but it was like, that was where our focus was. And that kind of made me feel a bit uneasy, but I didn't really know what I felt about it at the time. So I just kind of didn't really offer much. And now if I was to be in that kind of conversation, I know I'd have quite a strong opinion about it. And so that seed of curiosity, that concept I hadn't really understood, it's kind of flourished. And through my journey of like being a medic, deciding I wanted to leave medicine, not knowing what I wanted to do, then deciding what to do, and then my journey through that new career, I've realized it's all been underpinned by curiosity. And curiosity is a trait that it actually underpins, it's the foundation for so many of the other traits that we find desirable in people. And when I say desirable in people, I mean as a worker, as a colleague, as a friend, even as a partner. Like, curiosity is the foundation for so many of those attributes. Like recently you had a talk on creativity, and I think that you kind of even touched upon it during that. Like, creativity comes from curiosity. Understanding how to deal with complex problems comes from having the curiosity to to learn about lots of different abstract ideas. And if you don't have those building blocks of those different ideas, you can't then bring them together in a new and novel way. And, curious people, we see them all around us. They're the people who they can't sit still. They've always got, the mind's always whirring. They're non-conformists. They hate societal trends. They're always trying to rebel or do something different. They hate routine. They like, from my perspective, I hate eating at the same restaurant twice because there's always another restaurant to go to, right? So, curiosity manifests itself in many different ways, and I'm sure we'll get onto that. But looking back now on what he said, and now I do read The Economist, and it's, back then I was like, that costs how much? Nah, there's loads of free stuff on the internet. I ain't paying for that. Now I understand the value of paid publications and whatever, and I guess I can afford to, or I have my priorities right. But really, like, reading about what I do in my job is I kind of need to know a bit about everything, because I work across every different sector. I'm not specialized in a single sector. And to me, I find that so nourishing, so interesting to learn about so many different things. And yeah, I think for some reason that always stuck with me. And I think I've realized why it always stuck with me, because he was hitting upon a concept I hadn't really articulated to myself. So that was kind of really the first instance I can remember of really understanding curiosity and its value. Sorry, I rambled a bit there, but
that's really interesting. I never heard any of my lecturers talking about non-medical publications, unless we were talking about a sort of specific, say a BSc, for example, in another subject, and that's really only when other reading material came into play. And it's so funny that you talk about The Economist, because I love that publication. My husband is an economist, and that's his profession, and so he always would get that publication. And not only is it excellent journalism, as you say, it's incredibly interesting, and it really broadens your horizons and your worldview. So yeah, I love that you read that too. It's brilliant. And yeah, I suppose my reflection on your story and the fact that one of your medical lecturers was talking about curiosity, even as a sort of not directly about curiosity, but encouraging a curiosity within you. It was interesting for me, because I would say that medically, in the medical profession, historically, curiosity is a really, really big part of medicine, right? I mean, it's always been a major pillar of research, of the sciences, and so many of the breakthrough treatments and things that we know about conditions over the years have been found because someone somewhere has wondered, what if we do this, right? And I think really one of the things that attracted me to medicine as a young person was this romanticized idea of exploring possibilities and discovering new things. And yeah, when I actually qualified, the reality of it was quite different. I found that amongst all of those skills that you use on a regular daily basis as a junior doctor, curiosity was rarely one of them. So yeah, I suppose I'm wondering, what was your experience like as a junior, and how are things different for you now in terms of curiosity?
Yeah, I think, like, you're really right. So in terms of how we think of medicine when we're younger and the profession, but what we're really thinking of is the science there. And science and art, they only exist because of curiosity. You use the phrase "what if." That is so key, and that's something that we do a lot in my team, in my job. Like, we wouldn't have society that we have today if people hadn't asked the question "what if," and that's really what's propelled the science of medicine. But just like that lecturer told me, medicine's a system, and the way that system actually operates as a doctor working in a clinical setting is very different to how that system operates as a scientist working in the medical, in the life sciences. Like, they're two quite different things. And I think I don't want to start off by saying like, oh, medicine ruins curiosity, because actually society ruins curiosity. So there's been like a lot of research into curiosity, and we found that kids up until are the most curious, or humans are the most curious at the age of 4 years old. They ask on average about 300 questions a day. And, you know, anyone who's a parent or has had a nephew or a niece or whoever, or just interacted with kids, they're always asking, why this, why that, almost to the chagrin and frustration of the parents or who they're with. But like, that curiosity is fundamental, innately part of being a human being. But as we get older, we enter the school system. And that's the beginning of, not necessarily the beginning, and maybe some children, their family and their parents have dampened their curiosity because they've got fed up with them asking so many questions, blah, blah, blah. But the real bit where it gets leveled off for a lot of us is in the school system, because suddenly we're surrounded by lots of different, our peers. We don't want to look foolish. We're scared of saying the wrong thing, upsetting someone. So all these social pressures come in. And then, you know, the schooling system is based upon like hitting metrics, right? And I'm sure we'll come on to this later about how performance indicators, metrics, actually are a counter to curiosity. So, you know, a school's aim is to get as many A students out as possible, as many B, you know, to up the grades. So it's not, the education system that we're in, again, is not to foster curiosity. It's to dampen curiosity, because it's about how we've defined performance. So that's why, you know, as you become a teenager, your questions are, is this going to be homework? Will this be on the test? Etc. Instead of going, why, trying to understand the bigger picture, the larger thing. So already society from the school age is dampening down our curiosity. And then actually a lot of good universities do the opposite. They try to then foster that. They try to then keep things broad. I think medicine, to some degrees, less so than other, like, more philosophical studies or more arts kind of degrees. But, you know, it's still there. There's still the element of, you know, and some unis push it more than others, like scientific research and trying to get experience of that. And science fundamentally is founded upon why, what if, all those kind of how, all those kind of questions. So university, again, for a lot of people opens that up, but it can bring that back down. And then you get into the workplace, and not just the medical workplace, but many workplaces. It's about, you know, we're obsessed with efficiency. Since Henry Ford, what was it, 1900, he basically made the production line. It's about getting the cars out as fast as possible, as quickly as possible. It's about no margins, you know, just in time supply chains, all this kind of thing. It's all about efficiency. So what we've done is people say we've battered out creativity, but actually what we've dampened down is curiosity, because like I said before, that's the foundation for creativity. So, you know, and medicine, the stakes are higher. Like, there's, you know, in my job now, like, if I mess up, I might lose the firm some money. But if I mess up in medicine, you're messing with people's lives. So, you know, we've had things like Harold Shipman and all those other things that have meant that we've tried to standardize things. We follow flow diagrams, nice guidelines, blah, blah, blah. So, and then the pressures of, like, you know, any of us who've worked as an F1 or F2 or beyond, it's the, like, you know, how many patients you've got to see through. You've got cannula here, bloods here, you're running, getting scans, blah, blah, blah. There's no time for curiosity. And anything you do outside, there's no time within the workplace. So it has to be something that you do in your pastime, that you explore in your own time. And, you know, just like your guest said on the creativity podcast, like he was tired all the time. Like you're often knackered in F1 and F2, so then you don't even want to, like that dampens that down. And then again, like medicine has this like, also I don't know whether medicine attracts a certain type of person or it molds certain type of people, but I've seen it again and again where, you know, if you're at a party which is dominated by medics and you're not a medic, how alienating it could be. And I use that example because it's something I'm really passionate about. And it's something that really drove me away from the profession. Like being at parties where, like, you know, my ex-girlfriend at the time when I was a doctor, she was a non-medic, like having her sit through that, and even just seeing other people visibly bored and no one else picking up on that because we're talking about atrial fibrillation and this patient, like, and it's not a one-off, like it was so common. And, you know, most we're put in this sphere where like all we do is work and then socialize with the same people we work with. So, you know, like you'll see with really curious people, their network spans many different professions. They're not just, you know, if they're in advertising, it's not that all their network and their friends are in advertising. They are across multiple different things. And it's the same, you know, you'll notice those doctors where you recognize that trait of curiosity, they have a network and a friendship circle that is wider than just medics or people from the hospital.
Certainly, I resonate with that massively. I mean, I would say I'm a naturally curious person, and at med school I did have a wide network of non-medic friends, really, and tried to hang out with you know, diverse groups of people. But I do feel you're right. As a junior doctor, I did feel there was very little opportunity to be curious in your practice, and certainly in the UK, I know other countries are different, but here there is very little room for experimentation at that early stage of your career, because, as you say, you know, you don't have the experience or the ability or the authority really to safely deviate from the guidelines. So, you know, the problem there is that you then end up with this group of intelligent people who perhaps would be naturally curious as doctors, but then you're doing huge amounts of administration work and huge amounts of paperwork, and then that kind of leads to that prolonged curiosity deficiency, if you like, and that then leads to boredom. I mean, certainly that was my experience. I got bored of being a doctor, stopped being interested, I stopped learning, and also I think there's a culture of mocking curiosity, or at least making fun of it in the NHS. I mean, you said about how kids always ask why, and that's lovely, and they have no embarrassment and no shame about that, the fact that they didn't already know the answer. And yet at med school you become the opposite to that. You know, I certainly felt like you got looked down on somehow if you didn't know the answer, and if seniors would grill you, for example, on ward rounds, and you get judged and belittled for ignorance, for getting it wrong. And, you know, I notice it in myself sometimes, even now, if someone says an acronym or a term that I'm not familiar with, you just keep stum. You pretend that you know what it is, and then you desperately go away and Google it later, which is insane. And it's something that I've actively had to try and combat since leaving medicine, and try to be that little kid again and say, actually, I didn't understand what you just said. Can you explain it? And when you do that, invariably it leads to really interesting conversation. You know, if you're talking to another decent human being, it leads to an interesting conversation. You learn from that. So, I mean, that's really how it should be, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, like, going to your point about the acronyms, and, you know, people do that all the time, and it's not even a medic thing. Like where I work, people use acronyms all the time. So it's about noticing that and then making a conscious effort to call people out on it, because you know, there is nothing wrong. Like, it's their fault for talking in another language. You've decided at the beginning of this conversation that English is your preferred language, or whatever language you're speaking, be it Italian or like Hindi or whatever. Like, so then why are you throwing in jargon, which is from a completely, you know, different language? So just, and if you're not on the same page, just ask people. And like going back to what you said about talking about medicine, like, I don't want to come across as bashing medicine too much, but I don't know whether medicine attracts a certain type of person as well, or it molds people a certain way. But I think generally a lot of medics are the kind of people that like answers. They're like concrete, right, wrong, black and white. And many people in, say, psychiatry might disagree with me, but one of the things that I think why psychiatry, for example, has a problem with recruitment is that people aren't comfortable with the grey, because there's less of the known. And right and wrong in specialties like psychiatry, it's a bit more ambiguous, and a lot of people are uncomfortable with that, which I think, whereas curious people like generally revel in ambiguity because it gives them a purpose, it gives them direction, it gives them something to look to, whereas less curious people revel in the certainty because there's less cognitive effort that's going to be put to something else, like like trying to demystify something. So, I think there's the amount of times when I was, doing my psychiatry placements at uni, oh, it's fluffy, it's, things like reflection, it's fluffy, the way, it's just like, it's frustrating because I was like, this is what's cool about it. Like, people don't understand what the hell's going on. Like, maybe I just like to pontificate a lot, but it's just great that there is, instead of just trying to rote learn a load of facts, I'm trying to piece different things together. And, there's a, like, you've got to be happy. You've got to embrace ambiguity if you're curious. And also medicine is like, to counter my point about attracting certain people, like, we're brought up to believe in a pathway, right? Like, our career is a pathway. And it wasn't that long ago where if you took a gap year, you were looked down upon from a recruitment perspective. Like, oh, this person doesn't know what they want to do. Like, if they were really dedicated to the specialty, they would have done a load of research and blah, blah, blah. Whereas now they've kind of had to change tack because so many people have been taking gap years. Like, when I see people take gap years, or they've worked for different companies, or they've done different things, I'm like, I want to know more about that person. Maybe I want to hire that person. Like, that's the kind of person that's interesting to me, not the person who is like, from the age of 18, I'm going to be whatever, cardiologist, gastro, whatever. And that's all they've done. They haven't even bothered to look. So they've made a decision with a lack of information, being an 18-year-old before going into med school. They then haven't been open to opportunities around them. They've decided that that's all they're going to do. And then they've just had their blinkers on. Like, that to me is not the kind of person I want to work with. So they're the people that I'm not going to be hiring. Whereas the people who
it's interesting because Hannah's comment that's just come through saying, I agree, curiosity is a fundamental part of many aspects of life. So I wonder why society has claimed the proverb curiosity killed the cat as if it were negative. And then she goes on to say, can it be a negative thing? And I think what you were just talking about there, and some of the points you touched on earlier, is that it can be, if not a negative thing, it can be an uncomfortable thing to, as you say, to be in that place of ambiguity and not know the answers. And also going back to your point about the way that our society is built, if you are a curious person and you're not playing the game, the game that's constructed for you, in you've got to reach certain grades, or you've got to do exams a certain way, you've got to learn a certain way. There is a danger there of curiosity in a way, isn't it? There is a danger of not conforming really to the way that society expects us to learn.
Yeah, so like that adage, curiosity killed the cat. Like, I really feel that comes from a place of, like, people not wanting to. It's all about like privacy, right? So not asking about what your neighbors are doing. You saw XY thing over the fence, like, stop poking in other people's things. And that, like, gossips and people who are poking their noses, that's like a different type of curiosity. And that, I guess, that's not necessarily the curiosity that is the most productive. But like you said, a lot of society is about conforming. That's why trends exist, because people like to follow other people. We are inherently sheep. But those who are curious tend to be nonconformist. And you talked about playing the game. Like, you can play a different game. You can define your own game, even within medicine, which traditionally had very set pathways. I know so many people now who are, and as you do as well, Anjali, like, who have stayed in medicine and they've crafted a different set of parameters, a different way of doing things. They had to be brave. And, people like me and you we ran on their coattails, those people who took the risks 30 years ago where it really was different. And we kind of built on that. But, I know people who've gone in, I was a teaching fellow for a while at university. So I know people that I worked with on that then were given their own bespoke training posts as a result, where they could do 4 days of their specialty, 1 day of education. You can't apply for that stuff, but they've redefined the rules. They've redefined the way to do it. You only do that by exploring other options. You only get to that stage by seeing what's possible and then redefining the path that you want to take. And this might sound really grand and dramatic, but it really isn't that grand or dramatic. You don't have to be like some intrepid explorer to do it, but you really can redefine how you go about success. And, if you read 100 biographies from 100 different entrepreneurs and Nobel laureates, there will be so many different paths that they took. But the one thing that will underpin most of them is that they had an event in their life that fostered their curiosity, that made them feel that it was all right to be curious. And actually, I say that because there was a study that was done where they literally read like 100 different autobiographies, and they found one thing that was common. Nearly all of them was this one event. So like the Wright brothers talked about how their parents actively, I think it was Orville Wright, he talked about how his parents actively encouraged the brothers to explore whatever they want, and he said that was a really formative part of how they ended up coming up with flight. So like, I think it's really important to foster that in, your children or the people that work for you, etc. And they can then create their own new paths. But you don't have to feel like, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with going down the traditional pathway either, but you have to do what's right for you. And if that traditional pathway isn't working, everything's not lost.
No, it's interesting that you point to the Wright brothers, because one of the famous parts about their story was the fact that they were basically cobbling together a plane in a bicycle shed with bits of old stuff that they had, and they went through countless iterations, and they had no funding and they had no backing, and there was a guy, and it's interesting, I've forgotten his name now. There was a guy who was doing what they were doing at the exact same time with far more funding, far more interest, far more backing. And I cannot remember his name. I remember the Wright brothers because they got there first. But it's interesting that you bring them up, because there is that element of risk, right? That they spent years failing. They spent years failing before they achieved first flight. And we talk about, you mentioned how it's not a grand thing to kind of try these different things, try different pathways in medicine. But I think as a traditionally risk-averse profession, we medics, we find it hard, and perhaps this is something to do with the hierarchical structure and that set pathway that's given to you when you're 17. But yeah, to deviate from that path, to be curious, there is a risk to it. So in some ways, I can completely understand why curiosity can feel dangerous to some people.
Yeah, 100%. And so the kind of concepts that we've just spoken about, they can feel quite grand, they can feel like quite risk-taking. But, curiosity itself, there's lots of different forms of it. And we've talked about it as quite a broad thing. And there's been a lot of like research and work looking to define the different types of curiosity. And there's things like, so there's lots of ways you can develop curiosity, because curiosity is something that you can train. It's not like IQ, which is your raw horsepower. That's kind of there. But we talk about in business now, there's this concept of CQ, so your curiosity quotient. We had IQ, then we moved on to EQ, which was your emotional quotient, or your emotional intelligence. And then there's now CQ is the kind of latest concept of the last kind of 5 or 6 years of what drives success. So, and there's different types, because you have like your there's lots of different categories. Lots of different people are trying to make different frameworks for curiosity. But you've got things like your deprivation sensitivity, which is where you're uncomfortable because of something you don't know. So because you don't know something, you then act upon that to try and find it out, and often that's quite specific. So somebody has used that acronym, so you then go and look it up because you need to know. So you've got that deprivation there of knowledge, so you need to do that. But then there's like sort of social curiosity, which is when you're out and you meet somebody that says they do some sort of profession you never heard of. Instantly you're like, oh my god, tell me more. Like, that's so fascinating. So people who are really socially curious tend to be really great listeners, because that's how you gather information. And they're definitely the kind of people who are going to have a really big network across many different professions, different spheres of life. They don't just have that. And I'm not saying, if you have to have lots of different friends, but it's just their network is wider because they're fascinated by different things, and they're fascinated by hearing other people, their stories, etc. So that's kind of that really emotional human connection. And then you've got kind of this explorative kind of curiosity, where it's just you love learning for the sake of learning. Like, you always want to know more things, because you realize that there's an infinite amount of things to learn, and that's what keeps you stimulated, because you kind of get bored with knowing what you know. And that kind of joyous type of curiosity can be specific, but it can be broad as well, because maybe you just focus on one different thing. Maybe it's your specialty that you do, or there's some people who just want to know about the world in general. And identity is part of this as well, because we all have like different identities. Your work identity is probably different to the identity you have when you're with your family at home, the identity you have with your friends. If you have a hobby, when you're doing that you're doing that hobby, you're really happy, and you find that you always want to learn more about that hobby because that gives you joy. So you're reading, if it's fishing, you're learning about all the different ways of fishing, or where you can go fishing, and the types of blah blah blah.
It's that emotional part, isn't it, coming into it again? Feeling happy, feeling joyous, and that nurturing your curiosity. And I mean, the emotional part of curiosity is actually really fascinating 100%. For me personally, because curiosity is such a human need. It's, as a species, we are programmed to seek out new experiences, to explore new places, as you said. Certainly curiosity plays a huge part in that adaptability that made our species so successful in the first place. So I feel we as humans get a kick out of curiosity, and I certainly recognize that within myself. When I am curious, when something triggers that curiosity within me, I'm compelled to go and find out more about it, right? I think more deeply about it. So in a sense, it allows me to make more rational and more informed decisions in a way. And I think that is why I like the business world and the consulting world, is because you are being challenged constantly. You're constantly being required to respond to changes in your environment, and that's a scary thing. It's a stressful thing. But I feel like the reason I find it invigorating rather than oppressive is because it does require me to exercise the curious part of my brain, and there is something just quite liberating about saying, fuck it, let's try it, and let's just try it and see what happens.
100%. And we're talking about risk. Like, you're never going to push yourself forward if you're comfortable. And you need some level of being uncomfortable and challenged to really push yourself. And there always going to be an element of risk. So if you find where you're curious and you make an active effort to foster that, you will then be able to take more risks and be slightly less risk averse, because you can then associate the risk with the curiosity. And there's lots of different types of risk. Like, if you want to change career, there's other ways within that career you can do something that's less risky, but there's still going to be an element of risk there. But it's about, you don't know what those opportunities are if you don't look for them, and if you don't explore, and if you don't talk to people and see what's going on, and what's happening. And I think, like people who are curious, they tend to be they tend to be happy. They seem to have like a joie de vivre about them, because there's always something to pique their interest, right? Those who are really curious. So people like being around those kind of people like that, because it's kind of infectious. I don't know if that comment is appropriate in the current situation. But,
slightly too soon there.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's like fundamental for your own well-being, right? Forget about other people. It will make you happier, because everyone talks about finding your passion, find your love, find your joy. Like, that comes from, like, no one's born knowing their passion, right? You don't come out the womb being like, oh, I'm going to be lit at karate. Like, that's what I want to do. Like, you have to explore, you have to find that.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Don't lose that, and foster it in yourself, and then foster it in others. Because the more it's being fostered around, the more it becomes acceptable. Because like I said, we've dampened it down in society, in our drive for efficiency and our drive for conformism.
No, I want to come back to that point about efficiency, but just before that, there's a comment come through from Pyrokeet talking about risk aversion being a cultural thing. In US business cultures, failures are celebrated as long as your 10th business makes it big. But in UK business and research, you must not fail, which is really, really interesting. Because I mentioned before that my husband is an economist, and a lot of the work that he's doing at the moment is about research, scientific research, and how it impacts industry. And he talks about these two types of research. So there's kind of the one type of research that is just, it's research is driven by industry imperatives, basically. It's companies or organizations wanting to fund a certain initiative, some improvement to a product or a process, and it's very kind of clear cut what they want out of it. But then there's the research done by places like universities, and it is just curiosity based. It is just scientifically minded people trying out new things. And the economics of that is so interesting, because obviously the research commissioned by industry has far less risk attached to it, because you usually have a pretty idea of how it's going to work out. But the curiosity-based interest, there are absolutely no guarantees. You could sink thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds in something that goes absolutely nowhere, right? And obviously then people would be very upset about wasted taxpayers' money, wasted time. And yet, true innovation is not just the incremental improvement of things we already have, right? True innovation is something that is fundamentally completely original. So it's interesting really to think about the cost of curiosity and how we as a society really engage with that.
Yeah, like, you've hit upon, those two types of research, like science in its purest form, innately curious, but we've developed this capitalist society that we have to work within that framework. And that kind of research, the industry-backed research, there's so much confirmation bias in that stuff, because businesses want it to say something. That's why they paid money for it to kind of say that. And that's something I always struggle with, this kind of juxtaposition between like my scientific upbringing and the rules of science and the way business is kind of done. It's completely, like, they're quite alien concepts, so you have to kind of meet somewhere in the middle to do that. And what you said about innovation, like, that is the only way. It's that radical change that has propelled society forward. You're right, it's not incremental stuff. There's a really great anecdote about Richard Feynman, the quantum physicist, who in like 1959 said, why can't we write the 24 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica on the head of a pin, right? He said, why can't we do that? And then this guy is like a big dog in quantum physics. He's got loads of like real shit to do with quantum physics. Instead, he devoted some of his time to ask this question, like, what if? And he came up with the idea, like he realized how, the width of a pinhead is a 16th of an inch. So if you made all the pages of the Encyclopedia Britannica 25,000 times smaller, all that writing would be able to fit on the head of a pin. So what you had to do is you had to, if we had a tiny little printer that could make it that small, 25,000 times smaller, the dot of an I would have 1,000 atoms, and that could still be read by an electron microscope. So he came up with that concept, what if we could do that? And like, what's the point? Like, why have you done that? You've got all this other research to do for your university, blah, blah, blah. But the leap that he was making was like, why can't, this is 1959, remember, everyone's on books. He said, why can't information be stored? I want to see a world where the library, all the information in the library at my university, the library card, he was talking about hard drives. Like he came up with that concept, and then he put out a prize, $1,000 to anybody that could put a load of books onto a pinhead. And in 1985, someone finally won that prize, and they put the first chapter of Charles Dickens, one of Charles Dickens's book, on the head of a pin in 1985. And that's basically that kind of abstract what if helps us put things into context to now, to make that leap forward, to take that jump. And if you don't have that radical, bizarre idea, you're never going to do the steps needed to get there. Like, so I always talk about in business, like start off with the North Star, to use the jargon term, like what are you aiming for? What's the dream state? And then work backwards rather than working like aimlessly into the abyss. Think of and work towards that. And like to Pyrokeet's point about like it is really cultural, like risk aversion is so deeply entrenched with culture, and like how you take advantage of curiosity is really dependent on what you do with that. So again, there's been research that's shown that highly curious people, you kind of need to channel the way that their curiosity is developed to get the most out of it. So they looked at, a number of highly curious people that they'd like scored on a curiosity scale out of 4 or whatever. And then they found out which one of those were more successful into getting into like board positions at companies. And the things that they had in common were things like they'd worked for different companies rather than one company. They'd worked in multicultural teams, or they'd worked abroad. So they had all those different influences. So the way that you harness your curiosity is actually also important to really get good outcomes. And culture plays a big part in that. So they found that actually in Japan, for example, it's even more extreme than here, where like failure is even more of a problem. And what they really value is loyalty. So you like don't move businesses. It's really frowned upon to change businesses, blah, blah, blah. So, over there, they found even highly curious people were less likely to be in senior positions than in like the USA, because in the USA, there was more opportunity to move around and work in different or manage bigger teams and that kind of thing. So
yeah, that culture piece is so interesting actually, because I always talk about how culture is created by leadership. It's top down, and actually there's a comment here from Orima, and it says quashing curiosity is often about staying safe and maintaining the status quo, sort of like the difference between management in medicine and leadership. And leadership embraces curiosity and strives to make changes through being willing to make mistakes, which is exactly to the point that you were just talking about, Rohit. Like it, right. And leadership. I mean, I'd like to talk a bit about leadership and curiosity, if I may, because I mean, it's so interesting. Creating a curious culture is certainly, as I said, the remit of a leader, and yet it's something that I feel we don't talk about much in terms of leadership, in terms of their responsibility. So I mean, if we talked about research, if you actually look at the research around this area, there was this really interesting paper in 2014 looking at how curiosity actually modulates the ability of the hippocampus to form memory. And what they found through fMRI was that when people were in this highly curious state, they not only were better at learning and remembering the thing that they were curious about, but they also had an enhanced memory for incidental material that came up during that time. And so, you know, as a leader, the point that I would draw from that is that curiosity is a great motivator. You know, people are more likely to seek information, to educate themselves if their curiosity is triggered.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, yeah, that's a really cool study, actually. And it's so true, because we've all been in instances like, or any of us who have been to university or even at school, there were things we liked learning, there were things we didn't like learning. How much easier was it to study the subject you enjoyed, right? Because you were curious about it. That's what it was. You enjoyed it because you were curious about it, so you wanted to learn more. And going back to leadership, absolutely, it's about fostering a learning culture. So again, there's been lots of studies, many studies that have shown that like measuring your team based on performance lowers their performance, whereas measuring your team based on learning outcomes improves their performance. So there was a study with loads of salespeople from a medical devices company, and there was half the salespeople had to learn about, they were measured on like number of sales and key performance indicators, your classic sales indicators. And then the other people had to learn about, they were measured on like how much they learned about being a better salesperson and stuff like that. So it was about learning. Those people sold more of the new device that they start promoting, like significantly more than the group. And again, there was studies with the RAF showing that, not the RAF, this was in America, so the Air Force in America, about when they introduced key performance indicators about landing a certain number of planes over a certain number of time, pilots' performance decreased. So it's about fostering a learning culture, like, you know, things that, you going back to medicine, like people hate things like, some people are like, oh, why do I have to go to Grand Round Journal Club, all that kind of rubbish. But like, it's there for a reason. It's there to kind of promote learning and, you know, promote that learning culture amongst your staff. So build that into their day-to-day job. But there's other ways you can go about it as well, like model that behavior yourself. So I don't know if any of you remember or have heard of Greg Dyke. He used to be the commissioner of the BBC. He came in 2000, 2001. And he's quite famous as one of the most liked commissioners at the BBC. And one of the things he did was, before he came into power, he was like, you know, once I become the commissioner, I'm going to have far too much stuff to sort out. I'm going to be super busy. So before he came into being commissioner, he obviously knew he had the job. He went to all the departments and sat down with the staff and was like, what can we do to make the business better, to make your department better, to ask questions, model that behavior. So he showed that he doesn't know everything. So again, don't try and think, because there's this misconception that people think as a leader you have to have all the answers. Like, you don't. And actually it makes you more human to not. So people trust you more when you're valuing their expertise, because you aren't going to know especially if you're a group of people like managing lots of different people, lots of different skills. You're not going to know all those skills. So like, ask questions, model that behavior, show that culture is, model that culture, then people will follow. And it's
empathy, isn't it? It's empathy.
Exactly. And again, where does empathy come from? Curiosity. Like, it's curiosity underpins all of this, which is why I love it so much. And you know, so like, but also hire people. Like, when you're hiring, if you're in a hiring position, like, try to build that into your hiring process. You know, like, Google, quite famously, they would ask people like, have you ever found yourself unable to stop learning something that you'd never encountered before? And like, why did you do that? And what kept you being so persistent? And the way people answer that really shows a lot about what type of curiosity they have, if they have any curiosity at all. Is it because they were forced to, because they had a deadline and they needed to know about a topic, or was it because they just did it for the love of learning? Like, the way someone answers that question can reveal a lot about that person. So, think about curiosity when you're hiring. And then, we talk a lot about the power of diversity. Like, it's so key. Have diverse teams. If people naturally gravitate towards their tribe, and then they live in this echo chamber. So, there's a famous chef, Massimo Bottura. He used to, his restaurant was voted best restaurant in the world 2 years in 2016. So he's very famous in the culinary world. He makes sure that in his brigade, he has, he's got his two sous chefs, where one was really creative, loved experimenting. And then he talked about how he had another one who was very precise. He was, Japanese, so he fitted the stereotype of precision, and that made for a better team because they learned from each other. So, think about that when you're hiring. Hire for curiosity, hire for diversity, and model those behaviors, and build a kind of learning culture, and try not to be. It's easier said than done, right? Just don't have KPIs, but that's not the way of the world. So you have to kind of balance it out. Maybe start by building and learning culture, KPIs, and then have more of a balance. Just don't try and make it too KPI focused. And again, that's we have a lot of problems with efficiency in the healthcare system. So we've gone the other way of super efficiency, management consultants. I can say that because I am one, just coming in and and there is a lot of wastage in the NHS, but we go from one extreme to the other. We've gone from nothing to 4-hour wait times, all that kind of rubbish.
So we really need a balance, really, of kind of living up to what society needs in terms of living up to that conformist piece, but also maintaining that curiosity and that, giving people the chance really to explore.
Yeah, and not everyone can be completely extreme in their curiosity. Those are the people that change the world. Not everyone has to do that or be like that, but we have to make curiosity more known about. And, if any of us are parents, we have a role to play in that as well with our children, foster that curiosity. Or you Absolutely. Are around children, if you're a teacher or whatever, it can be tiring if it's the 190th question of the 300th day, but foster that in people, and don't because society is going to try and beat it out of them. So give them the space to do that. And the world is much more uncertain as well. People are scared of artificial intelligence and the robots and blah blah blah, and there a lot of professions should be scared of that. But one thing we have over them is they don't ask why. We do. That's our weapon. So that is an extremely good point to make, Rohit, and I think a really good point to end on. Thank you so much for this. Has been an absolutely fascinating discussion, and I can hear your passion when you talk about this. I'm really glad that I had you on tonight. If people want to find you, then how can they reach out to you? Oh yeah, cool. I'm on LinkedIn. I must admit, I am bad at replying to that. So please badger me if you want to get my attention, drop me a load of messages. If I haven't replied after 5 times, then send a 6th message. If you really want to talk to me that desperately, you probably don't. Or email, my work email is probably the best way to get in touch with me because I'm better at that. So Rohit _Chitkara at pwc.com. So my name, the full stop at pwc.com. I tend to be better at replying to that.
Super. I'll put your contact details in the show notes as well so people can find those. Thank you so much again, and I will speak to you soon.
Yeah, wicked. Yeah, speak to you soon. Thanks for having me on. This was a really good conversation. Sorry if I rambled too much, but yeah.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. That was so fun. I really enjoyed that. And thank you again, guys, for coming to another Real Reflective Practice. As always, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you're watching on Facebook, please like and share and comment as well. It makes a huge difference to me. You can @ me on Facebook and Twitter if you want to get in touch at Disillusioned Med. Or as I say, you can send your reflections to me as well at dranjalipereira@gmail.com. That's all for tonight, guys. Thank you so very much. I am actually taking a break next Monday. I have made a commitment to take at least one Monday off a month from broadcasting, because I don't want to burn out. I want to be bright and fresh every show for you, so you can enjoy it. So yeah, I'm having next week off, but I am back on the 13th of July when I will have an amazing guest with me, pediatrician, activist, and author Dr. Zishan Qureshi. So I am super excited about having him on. And we're going to be talking about the theme of failure. So please join me then. Until then, guys, take care, stay inspired, and I will speak to you very soon. Bye-bye.